welcome to Uldaman Priest Healing Perspective. This was a run I done a few weeks back now, because you've probably noticed there's a bit of a lull in the content on the back of the Paladin Deadmine run, which is my first video in quite some time. We basically weren't... I wasn't aware how poor the quality was of the actual footage, so I played around with some settings for quite some weeks actually. I've done numerous dungeons. I must have done Zul'Farrak 57 times, and what occurred was the settings weren't the problem. So I was fiddling around with settings on my recording software continuously, but as it turns out, it was actually the lead from my monitor to my graphics card. I was using some like old, it was like a DVI connection, HDMI to DVI, and obviously somewhere down the line lost some of the quality. Now this footage is significantly better, but I get it better again for some of my later runs. So we've got a backlog of videos incoming. I've got 3 or 4 dungeons saved, and it gets progressively better, the quality. So I'm happy now, and this is a good starting point. There's a patrol coming in here, and somebody's AFK by the looks of it. It was always a good start to the dungeon. I don't know if they quite pulled, or they just got away from pulling there, but we were kind of aware of what was going on. So this is a primarily self-made group that asked me to come and heal for them. I'd done some dungeons before with Holy Riz, and they now are grouping and doing dungeons as self-found. I think the only one possibly that isn't is Unkin. I think all the others are self-found. I'm not self-found on this character. I have subsequently started a self-found character, but being knee-deep into Landroe before that launched, which was the latter part of February, it made sense to me to finish Landroe off, get him up to 60, keep experiencing the content. Of course, this is my first dive into classic and hardcore as a traditional WoW retail player of many years, and a classic player of days gone by, who hadn't got time for the game quite as much, then decided to have a dabble with hardcore, and as now plays it for a couple hours most evenings as my relaxation tool of choice. So settle down, because this is a long dungeon, and there's going to be commentary all the way through. So I think it's 50 odd minutes worth of dungeon here, with an interesting group. They're very good players, but I don't think there was any... Well, I'm not sure if there was a defined tank, because everybody seemed to be having aggro. They're all melee classes, plate wearers, so it was mega difficult at these early mobs, which were quite low level comparatively to our levels. We were latter part of our 40s at this point, so it wasn't a huge problem in that sense that there wasn't necessarily a predetermined tank. I basically just healed where required. Now, we'll talk a little bit as the dungeon goes on about the priest experience of healing these dungeons, and your goals and objectives as a priest when you're healing these dungeons. And there's the 2 key elements I want to get in there nice and early. We spoke about this on the Paladin Deadmine video, and it's very prevalent for priest, more so with priest, for a key talent that we have. And the thing we want to talk about is the downranking of spells. It's very important. I think I showcased that in real time here with Landroe by putting a downranked renew on Tudin. I assume that's his second attempt at a paladin there with that name. I could be wrong there. But the basic premise of downranking spells is mana. That is what classic, and particularly hardcore classic, is all about, because there is no opportunity to go mid-fight because you've been inefficient with your resources. So, as an example, if you've got a renew, I'm going to just throw some numbers out here for the sake of this scenario. Let's just say your full ranked renew costs 600 mana and heals for 1000 over its duration. Your next rank down mana, let's say, renew, is 450 mana, and let's say that heals for 750. You get where I'm going with this. You need to judge how much healing your target requires, and unlike what we do in retail nowadays, which is the fastest heal is what wins, the biggest heal is what's prevalent, we want to make sure that our target is getting almost exactly topped up with our heal, or if there's a scenario where they're taking consistent damage, when you start your cast, you're almost thinking, where would this heal have my target once they've taken a little bit more damage from the mob that is currently tanking them and damaging them at the rate that it is. So things like down-ranked Prayer of Healings are really, really powerful, mana-efficient ways to get lots of small heals on lots of targets. And you'll see me using Prayer of Healing quite a lot. It's one of my go-to spells. And it'll be mostly down-ranked versions of Prayer of Healing. You'll see me quite often cast Inner Focus, which is keybound to F1 for me. So my F1 keybind being... I'm just checking here what my... What was going on. Sorry, just to digress to the dungeon a little bit. I didn't quite know what was going on here. So a lot of these characters are self-found, and they're just discussing who's looting what. And I hadn't actually looted it. I'm looking in my bags to see if I've looted anything, and it's still on the mob. It's like clearly just flashing there right in front of me. So I was a little bit confused at this point. It adds an extra element of still glittering. Adds an extra element of interest to a dungeon when you've got self-found, because in this instance there's two pieces of loot that you need to interact with to summon one of the bosses. So of course if the self-found player loots that first up, then they can't be traded to. So Umkin isn't self-found, so we trade it between ourselves. So I think that was the key element in that little scenario. But just flipping back to the down-ranked elements of spells, what you want to do is your heal to be as effective and as mana effective as possible. So you're using down-ranked spells to preserve mana. Alongside that, the other thing we do, and this is across all healing classes, but it's very, very prevalent with priests, with a proc of spiritual guidance, which is a proc you can, I think it's called spiritual guidance, I'm doubting the name of it now. It will proc through the dungeon, I'll point it out. So if I land a killing blow, my spirit goes exponentially high. I think it's a 100% increase, and it regens at 50% of its rate, so I get a very good mana regen at that point. So when we're looking at mana efficiency as a class, managing that proc is really important, and that proc will only trigger, it's surely going to trigger here if I get the second hit on this Stonevault Oracle, he says. It will trigger now at the top. Oh, it didn't trigger. It didn't trigger, sorry. Okay, so that's very relevant. So it'll only trigger when you kill a mob that yields experience or honor. So as you can see, that was a 38 level mob, so it didn't actually trigger there. So it'll be later in the dungeon we refer to that specific priest element. But there is something that's class wide, and that is mana weaving. So you'll see me quite often, and I think priests have got very good tools for this, more so than a lot of other classes. You'll see me dropping a full rank renew, let's say, on the tank, and then wanding for a period of time, and it'll seem like I'm wanding and there's healing needing doing. So what you're doing there as your healer is you're waiting 5 seconds. So from the last complete cast, 5 seconds, you will start regenning some of your mana. So you'll see me doing that quite a bit. It's very, very relevant to a lot of my playstyle, to making sure I preserve mana. So those 1 or 2 ticks of mana weaving, so where I've gone 5 seconds without casting a spell, and wanding doesn't count as casting a spell, just to clarify there. So if you can go 5 seconds without casting, which I'm trying to do now, for example, so you'll see I'm holding off on that renew, I'm inner focusing, I'm getting my prayer of healing off, and there's a couple of ticks of regen. You saw it there with my mana going up a little bit from 3-2 to 3-3, etc. because of that mana weaving that I obtained there. Now, Inner Focus doesn't use mana, which is why it's such a powerful spell, and why you'll quite often see me use Inner Focus with a full ranked Prayer of Healing, which is one of our most powerful group-wide spells. The only other spell you'll mostly see me cast Inner Focus with is Greater Heal. Now, Greater Heal is just incredible. It's almost a lay on hands at these kind of levels. It's a significant amount of healing. So you'll see me using Inner Focus in those scenarios quite a lot. Gonna have a swig of my tea whilst we clear up some of these scorpids. So what a lovely lemon and ginger tea on the go. Oh, and there's somebody at the door, so I shall be right back. And just like that, we're back. Sorry about that. That was a typical Thursday, half day of work, afternoon, no disruptions, surely. No, somebody's banging on the door. It is what it is. So, but back to where we were now. So you'll see a lot of wanding. Now this is where it's prevalent. Some of these little mobs now, even though they're green, if I kill them, there we go. There's the proc up on the top. If you look at my buffs now, you'll see the little green hand, and that means basically my mana's regenning very, very quickly. So what I tend to do at that point, and that's when you'll see me drop out some big heals if needed, because I know the mana's coming back very, very quickly. And you'll see quite often, as a priest, I'm at full mana for most of the dungeons. It's just incredible. Like, obviously there's a certain amount of, as a healer, when you're in any dungeon, if you feel like you're falling behind on your mana, first and foremost, do not be afraid to say wait. That's the biggest thing. Don't you? There's a group collective when it comes down to mana management of the classes, and particularly in hardcore, it is not worth rushing. If you feel like you're short of mana, you need a break, you need a time to get your mana back, just chuck it in the chat. Can I have a break, please? Most good tanks will obviously watch your mana resource as part of their tanking protocols. How official am I making this sound, by the way? But in terms of your own personal humility as a healer, don't it? You know, the bigger humility is running out of mana than it is being short of mana and using your mana more so than you would like. So if you're short of mana, just say. And the other thing I will say is, if you time it right, what you can do, if you're about half mana, you can drop a renew on your tank, and just before combat you can start drinking, and the first 3 or 4 seconds of combat then can be you drinking, with the renew doing the work for you. So there's the, it's Spirit Tap, sorry, not Spiritual Guidance. You'll see Spirit Tap is procced up the top there, and you'll see when the mana regen kicks in now, look how much mana's coming back at the top. It's just insane. Hundreds of mana per tick there, and that's very, very great tool at keeping you full when it comes to your mana regen. You'll see my heal bots suddenly sometimes changing colour for various classes. So what happened there was one of the classes got a disease, so that will be my keybind. I have it personally set to alt right click, and it will be it's sort of like your purify type spells, your cleanse, your magic, dispel, all those kind of things. I'll have them set to various keybinds, but that particular one, which I think is abolish disease, will have a continuous tick afterwards, and my control or my alt and left click will dispel magic debuffs. So that's very, very relevant to have those in a comfortable position on your keybinds, because it's very important to be able to do those very quickly and in response to some pretty problematic CCs. You'll see this in some of the later dungeons that I do for the priest perspectives, but there's mind controls, there's various other elements of magical and disease debuffs that are very, very powerful and become your priority as a healer. So you saw in that little scenario there where things got a little bit crazy at the start of that pull, where I had to use an inner focus greater heal. Unfortunately, QT Pie has perished at that point. That's a bit of a bummer. The little add-on that you saw pop up there, Def Log, it informs the servers and community of fatalities, and it will pop up, but it will also is a magic debuff to come off there. It also is a guide or a gauge for class success rates, and it will give you an area of an idea of a class's ability to get to certain points in the game. So Priest being a very good steady class right the way through, but as you get it's a bit of a counterintuitive one with Priest, because you don't have your Paladin-esque get out of jail free cards like your Lay on Hands and your Bubble and your Hand of Freedoms, all that kind of stuff. But you do have a consistent, you don't find yourselves in trouble as often because of the consistency of things like Power Word, Shield and Renew. You obviously have Desperate Prayer. I've got a keybound to F7 alongside my Dwarf Racial, which is Stone Form, which is very good at getting rid of diseases and bleeds. But something that's worth remembering when it comes to the very tanky moments, which you'll see later, where I have a princess moment tanking me for a prolonged period of time. Stoneform saves you in those scenarios, because what it does is it gives you a big armor increase as well. So it's worth remembering that Stoneform is a very useful racial. Desperate Prayer is a pseudo lay on hands. It mostly gets you to high enough health to survive, but at the same time it can't be targeted on other members of your team the same way as a lay on hands can. But it's still very, very, very powerful. I have a swiftness potion as my main get out of jail free card. Obviously, that's there's a bit of line of sight going on here. There's a very I think it could line of sight again. It's a very, very powerful tool in conjunction with some stuff like Psychic Scream, for example, if you really need to. Now that was an interesting element there where the tank pulled and a lot of the mobs ran across the room via the other pillar to me. That's the danger you have as a healer with heal over time effects like Renew. I didn't actively heal at that moment, because obviously you can avoid threat in those situations until your tank has adequately got threat from all the relevant mobs, but in that case I think it was a Renew tick that went off which caused the threat, and the best thing to do in that scenario is something worth remembering: is you run towards your tank. Don't go running away, because it's really difficult for them to get aggro if you're not within melee range. So obviously there's some scenarios where you've got to think a little bit outside the box in that case, but most of the time you're going to be wanting to run to your tank to give them an element, a chance to get threat. In this scenario with multiple plate wearers, you'd like to think that enough of them are on the ball either to taunt or AoE threat generate with an AoE ability to get the threat off you, and then you can go back out to max range. For the most part, as a healer in this version of Warcraft, you are going to want to be at the optimum range that you possibly can be. You don't want to be in the range of those interrupts, those fears, those knockdown effects, so try and stay as far out as you can where possible. And your objective when you are at max range, what you're thinking about for the most part, is are there any patrols coming towards me? You're looking around for patrols. You do not want to butt pull, but at the same time you do not want to be in the range of any crowd control-y type effects that mobs might have. I quite like my line of sights. You'll see a lot of the early iterations of the game have things like mana burn that target your healers and various other bits and bobs, so I'm quite often jumping in and out of line of sight as a personal preference, and it's not always required. And as you know and get to learn dungeons a bit more, then you'll know a little bit more about when you need to do that. I do it as a default action. A little note there, you'll see my healbot went red on me. That means one of my personal buffs has dropped off, so it's my inner fire buff that it monitors there, and it tells me when it goes red, it will inform me that my inner fire has expired or is about to expire, and it does the same for Prayer of Healing as well. Now, Prayer of Healing, Power Word Fortitude. One of the things that I have got fairly recently, you'll see up in the top right there, a 40-minute duration on my Fortitude buff. Oh yes, that group-wide Fortitude buff is epic. It does require a regen, Holy Candle, top of my head, but it's just so good. It really is. Just to click one buff and be on everybody for an hour. Now, there's an interesting point here. I get segregated a little bit. I'm trying to ping just to say that I can't get by there. I could have butt pulled, so I just played it safe a little bit. Again, don't have any humility. Don't just rush and run and be panicky. Just take your time. As you can see here, there's a pull in two different directions, which is always fun. But I think a lot of players were new to this dungeon, so it wasn't a huge problem. I did drop off a Prayer of Healing here. As you can see, it's such a powerful spell. It just goes crazy. And my thought process then was to try and get line of sight from those ranged ones, which I thought would probably give me aggro because of the healing threat generated. Healing threat is not to be scoffed at in Classic. It's outside of tanks, you're getting the threat pretty early, and then it kind of progresses towards the DPS as they start mullering the mobs. But another swig of that wonderful tea. What better scenario is this? So I'm a half-day Thursday, I'm sat reminiscing about a dungeon run with a group of people on Classic. I'm doing some audio commentary, getting another video up on the channel. Like I said, I've got multiple videos now pending. I've got footage for 3 more dungeons. Dungeons are my most enjoyable thing within the game. I absolutely thrive on them. Really enjoy it. I feel like it's where I feel most at ease and have the most joy. especially when I start to get to know the dungeons. Now, there's something of note here. These guys are doing Shadow Bolt Volley, which is something I've only just noticed, and a Mana Burn. Shadow Resistance, or Shadow Protection is a spell I have, so I noticed this. I tell you what, I gotta give myself credit there. Retrospective, past Kev, well done that man. He remembers. So when I saw that Shadow buff going out, sorry, this Shadow Bolt ability going out, I suddenly thought, I tell you what, I'll chuck some Shadow Resistant auras out across my party to mitigate a little bit of the healing. I don't know where all those guys just spawned from. I'm assuming somebody was on a quest there. But as you can see there, I stayed and took a little bit of extra drink. There's no need to rush out your drink here. A down rank prayer of healing. Now I've got that key bound down to the minus button. I do sometimes use my mouse to click down there if I'm kind of being lazy, but they are keybind, so my left hand on the keyboard, my right hand on the mouse. That's my play style. My right hand, in essence, in my mind, is controlling the Healbot UI, as you can see there, starting with Self, Landroe, and then the group in essence down below me. And my left hand is the offensive or the keybind hand, and my movement hand, so I can move and click at the same time. So it's very, I found it to be a very intuitive way of playing for all these years of playing. You'll see here I'm using things like heal. Obviously, dispelling is a big thing there. It was an immolation, and then a greater heal to get div all the way back up with a 2k crit, as you can see there. A 2k crit on a character that is 3k, pretty powerful. But then I revert back down to your down-ranked heals, one down-ranked prayer of healing, because there was a group-wide bit of damage. Really good spell for bringing back the group. I didn't really want anybody to drop too low. You saw how quick div took a big chunk of damage early on in that battle. So there wasn't really too much going on in terms of, or wasn't too much threat for most of the time, but there seemed to be a spike coming from somewhere. So it's worth just playing it safe, plenty of mana. Like I said, coming out of that fight with 2.5k mana left, you can't really complain. I say 2.5k mana with lots of powerful spells cast as well. So here we go, this is just checking the little buffs you get there as a self-found adventurer. So self-found is an additional element to Hardcore Classic where you can't trade or use the auction house. You can still use NPCs and stuff like that. I'm finding it to be really, really good fun. I've got a hunter on the go at the moment, and I've been very lucky with my drops early doors. I'm pretty well kitted out considering. And other than that, the gameplay is the same. So obviously dungeons take a big preferential play location for the self-founds, because you obviously got a condensed loot drop location, whereas open world it's much harder to find the items that might be useful to you. There are obviously quests and stuff which can be very good, but in dungeons you just get a spike of drops in that 40-50 hour window that you're in that dungeon. Another swig of my beautiful tea as we progress through the dungeon. So I'd like to hear what other people's thoughts are on the classic in general, but particularly hardcore. If any of you play and want to join, do whisper me. I'm on the European servers. Necrosh is my personal server, and I'm Alliance, obviously, as you can see. So I'm a dwarf. Most of my characters, I've got about 6 characters being leveled at the moment. I've got a human paladin, I've got a human mage, a dwarf, priest, I've got a human warrior, I've got a night elf hunter, and I've got a rogue, which again is human. So they're all on there, and you'll see, for the most part, I like to hang in Stormwind with Landroe and do the dungeons, and I'm out in the open world more so with other characters than I am perhaps with Landroe nowadays. He's become my main. He always has been. Back in the early days of Classic, from Landroe gaming days, 12, 13, 14, 15 years ago, Landroe was my main. And he remained my main, and I did switch, as I think I said on the previous video, for when I was doing Mythic Plus dungeons with my Shaman. The mobility of Shaman was just epic. I absolutely loved it. Just being able to keep up with the group in the Classic, in the Mythic Plus scenario, where you're quite often racing from mob to mob. It was so good on the Shaman, but just because of all those wonderful instant spells. Chain Heal obviously is just epic in the scenario, and I had one of the buffs where the name eludes me at the moment, but it's one of the buffs that charges up your Chain Heal for just an epic. It was almost like a Leo and Hans Chain Heal, quite incredible. So there you'll see a little scenario where I've got to renew on one of the tanks, and I'm just regenning my mana as those guys. There's no threat to them. Having a drink, line of sighted, and I can hop out whenever I'm ready, and almost at full mana, as you can see. And then I drop the little heal off, and then the group is pretty much good to go, full with renews ticking, and I'm almost, well, by the time my mana weave back out of combat here, you'll see that I'm there you go, the mana weave kicks in, there's one tick, and there's the second tick. 2 ticks of mana or big mana regen, pretty much paid for that heal there. So we're going from that scenario now with a spirit tap active, fully mannered up. It's fantastic, isn't it? It's a good play style, it works for me. It might not be the optimum way to play, I think it is. I think it's very efficient, it's very mana efficient. So this is worth mentioning actually at this point. That's a minor mana oil being applied to my weapon there as an enchanter. That's something I can utilise. And I also have mana regen food as well. I don't ever feel as a priest like I'm at any point unable to heal in terms of the throughput of healing. The only thing that we can ever do to lose a member of the team is so my mana regen is my biggest concern for the most part. So that's what I'm trying to optimize with my food and weapon buffs in this case. Obviously still early days, so it's oh, that's a nice drop there. It's still early days in terms of oh, I've already got it. I must have got that in a previous run. So I think, if I recall rightly, I think maybe not, Holy Riz, I think in later runs I did with them, started rolling on some of the healing gear upon request, and because they're self-found, I guess I was a bit more inclined to allow that, purely because they don't have the same opportunities to keep running these dungeons like I do. Oh, sorry, that wasn't really logical. They don't have the same opportunity to acquire items off auction houses and through other things that I would do. So if they're dropping in the dungeon, either I've already got it or it's not much of an upgrade. I'm not too adverse to the self-founds from needing if they're genuinely going to use it. If they're just vendoring it, or it's of no use to them, there's a different scenario entirely. I remember early doors I lost a wand. I can't remember which class it was, and I was really gutted. Yeah, I've been going in with my mage for I think it was cookies. It might have been cookies. I can't remember which scenario it was, but I was really gutted I lost the wand. And do you know what? Loot comes and loot goes. That is something that we find in Warcraft. Those of us that have played it for a very long time, loot comes and loot goes. And yeah, it's fun. It's beautiful to get a nice drop. I have a Sunken Temple run coming up where I got some really good drops. So look out for that Sunken Temple video. But at the same time, it would have still been a good dungeon even if I didn't get those loots. So I don't know why I'm writing in caps there. I'm just making sure, because I'm with self-found here, basically what I'm doing, I'm just making sure that I'm not hindering anybody else's progress by clicking quests. I had somebody start an escort quest in one of the dungeons without me at one point, so I'm just making sure that my clicking doesn't infringe anybody else. These guys obviously just assume I'm an idiot at this point. I'm like, well, yeah, of course you can if you have the items and you can click it, which is fair enough. As long as I'm keeping them alive, I can be a dunce. As you can see here, we got a different tank now for this pull, and I think it's something I noticed quite a way for this dungeon. Just the number of different tanks I'm having to heal. I remember when there was a time where I was playing a lot of Holy Paladin, and Beacon of Light was just so powerful, and that's those sort of scenarios always remind me of the Beacon of Light days where you got a tank with a Beacon of Light on, and it's very easy just to do other stuff, and just your tank's always getting topped off by default because of the heals. It's just pretty epic. So it's a very slow dungeon, this one, and whilst it's a bit of a death trappy dungeon, or particularly the last couple of bosses, this group was fairly good at their jobs. It's very easy though to pull extra mobs here, and I think that with a lot of the hardcore and the classic dungeons, when you see so many of the wipes on the channels that are dedicated to the hardcore deaths, how many of them come from mispulling in dungeons? It's just brutally punishing when you overpull in dungeons. And again, I keep referring to retail in a lot of what I'm talking about when you refer to the retail way of playing, which is tank go faster in chat continuously. when it comes to the classic hardcore. Slow down, tanky boy, we don't want to die, is the order of the day. It definitely changes the dynamics of playing through a dungeon. They're just as enjoyable in their own ways, but yeah, it's very interesting. Sorry, I've got a few messages coming through on the old mobile. I shouldn't really look at this when I'm not at work, but you know, it's one of those things. So we're back to the dungeon now. So we're getting to what are we at this point? We're probably about 2/3 of the way through, maybe just over half, between 2/3 and a half. There's an inner focus prayer field. Watch how powerful this is. It's just insane. You saw like it was 500 to 800 across the entire group in one spell cast, which is pretty powerful. So we're talking about the final boss. I'm just reading the chat there, and they're talking about the final boss. I actually saw a couple of flash heals there, just to catch up. You can see how much my mana gets zoomed at this point. I'm not quite sure what's going on here. I got a bit distracted and certainly oomed myself there. So get the drink in whilst the looting's occurring. And basically what they're talking about here is the final boss in the dungeon, and some groups like to kite it to a different location to make it slightly easier because you don't have so many ads to deal with. But these guys were just like, let's just zerg it, bro. At this point again, though, there's a lot being pulled here. There's a lot of people not paying attention. So I actually had to use a shield on the tank, which was a warrior at that point, because I wasn't sure I was going to get my greater heal off in time. So, well, I got the emergency shield up. So something worth noting. It's probably something I'm sure most people know, but it's worth mentioning. When it comes to healing warriors and druids as a priest, shield is for the most part a no-go. And the reason being, it generally inhibits their rage acquisition, which is their threat generating abilities, or the resource they have to use their abilities. So for the most part, you're not wanting to powered shield warrior tanks. I think Div was the tank in this scenario, and then what I do then personally is I change playstyle entirely. I start to go to a renew based playstyle, whereas I probably could have been healing the paladins. I totally forgot about it, so I just changed my playstyle. But if you've got a paladin tank, you can actually shield them. It's not very often you have paladin tanks, it's mostly warriors and druids, but because of that rage that I was talking about and the generation issues they might have, if you powered shield them, you won't see me powered shield very often when I've got warrior tanks. Obviously casters, as a default, I tend to powered shield casters, because not only does it give them a like health buffer, it also, if they're getting hit at that point, it stops the knockback as well, which is really powerful. It's why it's such a powerful spell for us priests when we're healing. And when we're leveling, is, you know, the rotation is fairly monotonous and boring, but very powerful. And it's Mind Blast, Power Word, Shadow Word, Pain, Holy Fire, and Shield Wand, and then do that for the other 50% of the mob's health is generally what we're doing. You see how powerful again Greater Heal is there. It's an almost 2k crit on Twooden, and that was an interesting thing actually worth mentioning. So I started casting a Greater Heal on Dib, and then thought actually I probably don't need to Greater Heal there, so I did a heal cancellation, which you can do multiple ways, but the easiest way to do it is just to slightly stray one direction. So by moving, it stops your heal cast. So in that case, I was casting a Greater Heal, didn't really need to cast a Greater Heal, so a little shimmy to the one side, and we're looking good again. Now, this part of the dungeon, you'll see I'm drinking a lot more here. Obviously, the mobs at this point are much higher level. I faded there to get the aggro off, having got a heal aggro off of the powered shield. But these mobs are a lot higher level now and hitting a lot harder, so you'll see that I'm using a lot more of my mana pots at this point. Early on, you're not really struggling too much. I'm trying to get a spirit tap tick there, which I didn't get. So I'll leave the renew ticking and I will drink at this point. And regen my mana the old-fashioned way. So this is the second to last boss, and again, these bosses hit fairly hard at this point. So this is the little ritual you have to do at this point to summon the Stonekeepers, which spawn one at a time. Now these have a very interesting mechanic, as when they die, they blow up. And again, we're priests, so we don't really care about that, do we? Because we've got that absolutely epic spell, Prayer of Healing. But as you can see, there's quite a lot of damage going out at this point, so I'm having to preemptively Prayer of Healing. And then we can get another heal off on Tood in there. Now it's very interesting, and it's something that happened in one of my earlier runs. I was stood by one of the golems that was about to animate and wasn't really paying attention. I'm not gonna lie, and I got a Prayer of Healing off, which crit a couple of times, and I got a lot of threat off that Stonekeeper. And it took a while for the tank to run over to the room and actually get the threat back. So you saw me use a powered shield on Tood in there. So upon the explosion, you know it's going to happen. It's a bit of damage that can be preempted in that sense by a powered shield. I even did it on Div there, because at this point threat isn't so much of an issue. Turns out he wasn't actually tanking the mob. That's the issue when you've got multiple tanks. So I end up having to get it on Holy Riz as well. So they both got powered shields on them at the moment. And then last Stonekeeper, so we get a nice big flash heal, and we top everybody up with a Prayer of Healing, I believe. Do we? Don't we? Nah, we call it a day there. So that's that sort of boss scenario done. And again, it can be, you can see the amount of damage that's going out there. I used most of my mana. It was a very good group, so 400 heals per second there, and that's a lot of healing for this level and these scenarios, so it's quite a lot of healing. And we now make our way towards the final boss. So we're getting the usual healing rotation here, so little heals, greater heals, renews, keeping everybody topped up. Again, like I said, we're getting to a point now where the mobs are significantly harder hitting. I'm trying to get my Spirit Tap proc there with a couple of wand blasts on a low HP enemy. I didn't get it off, but it's not the end of the world. And what you'll find with Priest definitely is you won't always get those procs, but what I tend to do is target one of the lower HP mobs that's sort of starting to get towards the point where one or two of your wand blasts might... this bit's pretty tricky if I recall. I think we pulled the whole room here. Nah. That must be a different run. Like I said, I've done a lot of runs back to back to back in this dungeon, so it must have been one of the other runs where we pulled the whole room, and it was quite intense. You had to go into your Imber mode. Those little moments where you oh no, here we go. Maybe it was that where we pulled the whole room. So I did a fade there, a preemptive fade. I had a lot of aggro. So how you know if I've got aggro with this UI is if those mobs have got a red indicator on their health bar, it probably means I'm either high on the threat table or about to get threat. So I got threat again here, so I come down, let the guys... Again, this is one of those scenarios I was talking about earlier. We don't really want to be here. I get in a bad position now because I can't get back out of the AoE effects. So a couple of renews, then line of sight again. I didn't really want to have to do that, but once you've got aggro, sometimes you've just got to put yourself in harm's way so that the aggro can go to those that can take a few hits. It's incredible as a cloth wearer how much damage you take from these hard-hitting melee mobs, as opposed to these plate wearers with 40 or 50% physical damage reduction from their armor contribution, whereas we could be sitting at maybe 20 or 25%. And of course, we're trying to heal. We don't want any knockbacks and stuff like that. So, scenario there where got threat, had to get down to the melee guys so they could get the threat off me, and you know, that has to be done. We'd already used fade at that point, so we'd preemptively faded. Or maybe it was this room that pulled the hole as well, I don't know, but either way I'm trying to get some mana back. And I'm about to lose my Blessing of Wisdom as well, which was pretty painful. And again, you find there's not a lot of group-wide AoEs for the tank classes. There's a couple, but obviously you're going to find I get threat quite a bit just from healing. You can see there the mobs are very quickly onto me from one or two Prayer of Healings or big crit heals. There's a lot of threat that comes forward, so I'm just kind of line of sight just in case they are looking to come down my direction. But again, it's something I've worth mentioning as well at this point is I haven't actually potted in this dungeon, so I do like to save my pots for the absolute travesty moments. So not just because I don't like to pot when I get low preemptively or half or quarter health. I only pot when I really, really need it. Primarily to save the pots, but also it gives me the option of using a different pot if needs be. Ironically, on the back of a Sunken Temple run, I found out about Light of a Loon, which I didn't even know existed in the game. So I've got that now. So I've got one get out of jail free card pending on the character now. Sat there, keybound to macroed with my Hearthstone. So here it is. The final boss. It's a hard boss. It hits hard. You need to have good DPS. You need to have a bit of coordination with the adds that spawn. If you don't, there'll be issues. You can do a slightly different way where you can activate the boss, run out of this room and back to the previous room, where you can then actually tank the boss in that room. You don't get quite so many of the adds coming down, but we like to do it the proper way. Or I say we like to. With this group, it makes sense to just do it the normal way. We're more than capable, and you get to see the scenario at the boss fight as it should be done. The only thing that can hinder you here is lack of communication, to make sure you're all on the same wavelength. So here we go, we're activating the boss, we're all in the room, and there we go. And as you can see, when the boss activates, the reason why a lot of people either don't do this boss or do it the slightly easier way is he's a fairly high HP boss for this dungeon. You've gone through this dungeon and suddenly you're fighting a level 47 with 30k HP who hits fairly hard. Okay, another thing is, like you see, switching from tank to tank, one tank, two tank, and then he activates one of his adds, which the warrior is on duty to take care of. So you can see I actually know who's tanking at that point, so I could get a nice powered shield onto me tank. And there's a big old activation again. You see lots of mobs getting ready to be activated here. So I'm sort of preemptively getting into position so that people can help me out a bit here. And there we go. Warrior on duty, Paladin's on duty, Bear on duty, and I can just do my thing. But my positioning was the important bit there, is to make sure I'm within range of my melee to get that threat off of me. And at this point it's a very simple tank and spank, so I revert to smites and powered holy fires and whatnot. I do go back to healing here, a couple of ad spawns, I don't want anybody to get too low. But there we go. That is Uldaman done in completion. Nice drop for the self-founds there, so that was great to see. And we go on through and gather the loot. So another good video. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope the quality is much more to your liking than the Dead Mines video, which was still fun. But of course what's happening now is 2 more videos you'll see coming up in the coming weeks. I'll stagger them a little bit, but we've got some more footage, more dungeons, some cracking runs through Zul'Farrak and Sunken Temple still to come. So thank you for watching. Landroe out.